Good morning.
All right, I am seeing that it is 8:01. So we are, good morning, Perry. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to our second of 4 webinars that Veterans Yoga Project will be providing during Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder Awareness Month, PTSD Awareness Month. If you were with us last week, we did an intro to trauma and post-traumatic stress, and we talked about post-traumatic stress and trauma from a clinical perspective, and then also from a felt, lived, or survivor's perspective. And we talked about, in particular, the way that trauma is defined by a lack of 3 things, right? Safety, predictability, and control. And we talked about how when we're undergoing a traumatic event, there's a lack of safety, predictability, and control, both externally in the external environment, but also in our internal environment, right? Our thoughts aren't what we thought they would be. Our behaviors aren't what we trained to do. So very often at the time of a traumatic event, our own thoughts and behaviors and feelings are not predictable, controllable, or felt safe. We know that when people develop post-traumatic stress, they continue to feel like the external world is unsafe, it's unpredictable, and it's uncontrollable. And maybe even more debilitating is my internal world when I have post-traumatic stress lacks safety, lacks predictability, and lacks control. My own mind, my own thoughts, my own feelings in my body, my own behaviors. So today we're going to expand on that, and we're going to start to look at the stresses and traumas that are the members of our military face, and we'll try to put it in that lens and understanding a little bit about that lack of safety, predictability, and control. And I'm super excited because we have 2 amazing human beings with us today who are going to share their lived experience with military and stress and combat trauma. As I will remind you again at the end, this is the second of 4. So next week, and we'll put that in the chat at some point, we're going to have Dr. Gail Parker here. And she's going to be focusing specifically on racial and ethnic-based stress and trauma. Again, if you guys haven't gotten her books and actually read and worked through them, I really encourage you to do that, especially if you're not a minority or someone who typically feels like they experience racial or ethnic bias against them, because it's really a valuable book and process for all of us. And then week 4, our final week, we're going to bring Jessica and Mike back, and we're going to talk a little bit about post-traumatic growth and where do we, how do we take and accept and hold all this trauma and the stress, and how do we move forward and move past all of the, or maybe move through some of that stress and trauma. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to invite our 2 guests of honor to introduce themselves. Jessica and Mike, we're going to spend again today talking about really what it's like to serve in the military and the stresses and traumas that are intrinsic in that, both for people who are not in combat and then also combat related stress and trauma. So again, thank you all so much for being here. And then one last thing is I will remind you that this is part of our annual fundraiser. And that Veterans Yoga Project exists and does all the amazing work we do, and the 17,000 visits where veterans are coming to our class because of you, because of the donations from our community. We are a community supported organization. So anything that you can do to connect us with yourself or others who want to partner to help bring recovery and resilience to our veterans, families, and communities, we would be very grateful. So without further ado, I am going to go ladies first. Jessica, good morning. I would love for you just to take a minute to introduce yourself to the room.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me, and super happy to be here. Honored to be with all of you and everyone that has served and in the uniform, and also in the capacity of giving to servicemen and women as a first responder or in the supportive capacity. Thank you very much for your service as well. So yes, I served in the Army for 7 years, active military as a medic, And well, I guess you'll hear a lot about that momentarily. But I had various jobs. I left the military as a staff sergeant. And let's see, now I am, and I grew up in North Carolina, and my mom's here. She's Tressa Abernathy. So I'm super happy to have her here. And I think it's wonderful. She'll probably gain some insight into why I am the way I am today. And then let's see, today I live in New York, here in the Hudson Valley, and I work with veterans. And I'm the wellness director. I'm also a peer advocate with the Hudson Valley National Center for Veteran Reintegration. I'm also a yoga teacher with Veterans Yoga Project. And I do various other things with different veteran organizations. So I think that's it for me right now. And I'll hand it off to Mr. Mike Ergo.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Dan. And thank you everyone for being here. I'm especially excited to see Perry Chatler, my Obi-Wan, as I'll tell you guys about. He's helped me out quite a bit, being my yoga instructor. So yes, my name is Mike Ergo. I am from Northern California. Grew up not really intending to join the military, and I originally joined the military to be in the band. And it was quite the opposite of what I ended up doing, because after 9/11 happened, I went to boot camp a few weeks after that. I had to go to summer school instead of graduating high school, so I was a little bit on the slow side. So after 12 and a half grade, I went to boot camp and eventually switched over to the infantry, which horrified my parents even further. So they were hoping I would go to college. I spent 4 years in the Marine Corps infantry. And if you're not familiar with, I mean, you might have heard the term infantry. It's the people who usually do most of the shooting and filling up sandbags, the stuff on the commercials maybe. So I went to Iraq twice in 2003 and then again in 2004 and 5. And came back with some significant post-traumatic stress. And I'll talk more about that, my journey there, which led me through some pretty heavy addiction. And then we'll be able to talk, we'll get to the growth and stuff, not today, but another time. I am a director of a VA vet center where we do outpatient mental health up in Sonoma County, which is about an hour north of San Francisco. And yeah, I'm just here. And also with me is Bruno. He is my 12-pound dachshund who insists on sitting in my lap anytime I'm home. So everybody knows him too. So thank you everyone for being here.
Great. Thank you both so much for being here. So I thought we would start by talking to folks a little bit about the stresses of being, and maybe you, Mike, you talked a little bit about going into the military. So maybe before you get to the combat scenarios, what about just being in military service? For those of us who have not been, what is that like? And what are maybe some of the stressors that you have to deal with, when you're first, assuming you're pretty young, 18, 19, maybe when you went in, and what that was like for you and for each of you. And then maybe we'll talk a little bit more about combat related issues.
Go ahead, Jessica. I'll defer.
Yeah.
I'll look down to you.
I was being bad and heard part of it, so I was hoping you would lead.
Sure, no, I'm happy to. I'll tell you about
okay.
what it's the experience of going in. Was one of profound change where I ceased to be an individual and I became part of a group. And I didn't understand this concept fully, even have dedicated a lot of my growing up time to service. I grew up in an evangelical church and service to other countries and to the lower SES communities was pretty important to me. But this was, you show up, I'm getting yelled at. I'm no longer grandma's special boy. I'm not a special person anymore. I am a, POS. I'm nothing. I can't do anything right. And there's constant, arousal of just, I don't know what I'm supposed to do, but I know it's going to be wrong. And I know I'm going to get yelled at. I'm hoping not to get beaten too hard. So, and then I get my head shaved and line up with a bunch of people who I don't know, and I'm expected to perform, group tasks with and team exercises with, and a very fast pace that usually ends up resulting in failure and physical punishment. So at least the Marine Corps, there's no welcome, thank you for being here. It's you're automatically wrong and you're automatically too slow. So that was the introduction to my military experience, and I kind of expected it, but still, even so, it was pretty intense and different than growing up for me in an upper middle class, peaceful neighborhood of, suburb of San Francisco.
Yeah, I think I remember when we were talking about this that I too thought I was super special, right? And I think that you and I both having the later finding ourselves with the disease of addiction, thinking that, so egocentric, right? Like, thinking that we're, special people. Nope, we're not, just like everyone else, damn it. But yeah, I out of high school applied to the Air Force and Naval Academy, and no one in my nuclear family went to the military. My grandparents, grandfathers had gone to the military and really didn't have that conversation, except, here and there had that conversation. And then when I went to NC State University for a couple years and, just fooled around with my parents' money, and smoked a lot of pot, and I was in Navy ROTC, and that's where I found that sense of pride and, team and, devotion. And I too went to a private Catholic school until the last 2 years of high school. And so service and was a huge part of my life. I had that sense of being a part of something larger, and I understood what it felt, and also it allowed me to, kind of leave a little bit of chaos that was going on at home, and inside my internal world that I didn't know how to self-regulate at times. So I liked that. But when I did enlist into the Army, which is what I did, I was 23 at the time. And so I was towards the older side of people, but I wasn't the oldest, so I didn't quite get picked on. But when I got to my unit, I was kind of the older of the, the privates. But yeah, it wasn't quite, I guess I can't say it wasn't like boot camp, it was basic training in the Army. I remember seeing my brother's boot camp graduation, and that's actually when I decided, okay, I'm taking the plunge, I'm doing it, this is what I'm going to do, because I saw how just sense of pride you all emit, the Marine Corps, it's fantastic. Had you all actually, had the medical corps in the Navy, I would have joined the Marine Corps, versus the Navy, I would have joined, but the Navy wasn't accepting corpsmen at the time. Anyhow, yeah, the stressors of not being at home. I remember opening my locker, and, you're allowed to have like some pictures, right, in your little locker there. And I had, my dogs and my parents. And that was my little, like now setting up my, for my yoga classes or what have you, I have a ritual. I have a little altar rather, and that was my altar, right? So we as military men and women, we have that altar. But yeah, that was definitely very stressful having someone yell at me, because I didn't even like my mom coming in and telling me what to do with my room or anything.
I love watching your mom's reactions to all this too.
Oh shoot, I forgot about that.
It's so good.
And see,
She's
she
like-
has the red hair like you too. But you mentioned about being an infantryman, and you know, like that's what we're all trained as. It doesn't matter if you're in the Coast Guard or you know, the Air Force, or I mean, I don't know about Space Force right now, but you're, you know, we're infantrymen first, right? And that was the thing that really kept me back from actually signing, you know, because like I said, that it wasn't a question, I think, in my soul, in my tissues of whether or not was I going to go. It was, when could I settle that internal conflict with myself of, could I pick up my rifle and would I be able to potentially kill someone, you know? And, you know, I know now that if I had to, you know, I could do that. But that was something that like I really had to come to terms with. So yeah, having those stressors of you know, boot camp, knowing like, okay, here I am. I'm in line and I'm having to eat things that, you know, like eggs. Your life no longer is yours.
That's a good point.
So can I interrupt and ask, how did you deal with those stressors? So this is before you've even been to combat. You haven't really, you're still in country. How are you dealing with these stressors and being away from home and not being your own, right? Having control of your own life.
So for me, I relied on what I was taught, what I learned, and, you know, in the, you know, what I was taught, you know, when I was growing up was, you know, like prayer, right? Our Fathers, Hail Marys, because that's what I leaned on before. And so that's kind of what I did. I would lay in bed and I would pray our Fathers, Hail Marys. I had the rosary. You know, my grandmother would be so proud of me. I don't think I ever mentioned that to her, but that's what I did. I mean, I would stand in line to the chow hall and I'd open my Bible, because that was pretty much the only thing that you could do at the time, right? I don't know, Mike, what about you?
Oh, yeah, no, there's no Bibles allowed except for maybe you had an hour of free time sometimes, but we had to polish boots, so it was maybe 5 minutes of free time. The stress. So I'll preface how I dealt with the stress by what caused some of it. There's for my profession, and I think it extends through a lot of the military. The way you are accepted is not like coming to an office and just meeting people. There's an intense scrutiny of who you are. Can you be part of our unit? Can you hang? And so, man, I showed up to my infantry unit and my new first sergeant said, oh, this is, you know, Lance Corporal Ergo. He came from the band and he's from California. And I had red hair. So I just saw the people above me who were going to be in charge of me salivating, just like, oh, we're going to destroy this guy. So I had to put in my time and earn my friendships. It wasn't, you know, like, hey, nice to meet you. No, it was hazing, you know, a lot of physical violence, a lot of work, extra work that I had to do, picking up trash and I don't know, just all kinds of things that I don't know, I had to show that I belonged with these people so they could trust me. So the initiation process was still ongoing after boot camp. And then before we deployed, you know, we train up for specific missions. And when we were about to deploy for Iraq, we were doing chemical weapons training, and you know what to do should there be a chemical weapons attack. And I, as the newest member of my infantry platoon was assigned the role. I don't know what it's officially called, but I was the guy that if they said, okay, a gas attack has happened, but they're not quite sure, they think you can take off your mask, but they're not quite sure. My role was to hand over my weapon to somebody, and they would take my mask off and just watch me to see if I died or not. And at first, when I thought they were joking with me, I thought this was another kind of hazing thing. They're like, no, you're not important to the mission. You were the newest person here. So I said, oh, okay. So to deal with that, I was like, oh, I can laugh about it or I can cry about it. So I laughed about it, and I got a tattoo on my lower back, my little tramp stamp that says expendable, because I was government property. You know, I was like fully realized, oh, I am expendable. I'm government property. I can be thrown away, used, discarded. It's not a choice. So learning the gravity of it, and I was like, well, laugh about it, and dealt with it by drinking a lot of alcohol.
Yeah.
So that is the time-honored tradition of, I think, every military branch, alcohol to deal with things. So physical fitness and alcohol and tattoos.
So I guess I went the other way, right? So, and you know, we talked about this, that I too had to earn my spot. I walked into, I quite literally knocked the door down in the 82nd Airborne. I was supposed to go to, I went to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and I was supposed to go into a medac, into a hospital as a medic, and I didn't want that. I wanted to go to the 82nd Airborne and jump out of the airplanes, and so I went over to their in processing, and I said, "Hey, I heard you need medics," and they were like, "You're not on our list here." And I said, "Oh, but you know, I'm going to volunteer to be a parachutist," and they said, "Okay." And so they, you know, reassigned me, and I got to my unit, and my first sergeant, retired Command Sergeant Major Gomez, I showed up, and he was just like, "Oh God, here's this female," you know, did not like me. My platoon sergeant, you know, just came from the Rangers, just was not happy with me. There was just got a platoon leader that was a female, and sweetest, nicest person, a runner, you know, and that's pretty much all you do in the 82nd for PT. Run, you run, you run. And I grew up with a dad that was an ultra runner, and, you know, sports guy and everything, but I just I don't know, you know, you get stressed, and it can be a catalyst to not perform well, right? It can either push you forward or it can draw you back, and it was kind of pulling me back. So anyhow, you know, everyone just called me, you know, that derogatory term, a leg, because I wasn't a jumper, right? So but I said, I want to go. Well, I had to really work my butt off. I mean, I would stay late, and we had this warehouse with all our medical supplies, and rearranged our, you know, our warehouse. And I ended up getting an award for that. But, you know, everyone's like, oh, she's a suck ass, you know. And then, you know, on Friday nights, I would put on my my plates and my vest, and I'd go and run, and you know, just to keep up, not to get better, but just to keep up with everyone. And so anyways, the company and the brigade went down to New Orleans to train up for, you know, to get deployed to JRTC, Joint Readiness Training in in Louisiana. And I stayed back. And anyhow, there was another training going on, expert field medical badge training. And, you know, 2 weeks, very stressful. And they just kind of sent me because, you know, they needed numbers to go. Well, there were 300 people. And so we ended up, I went with a couple other people. And at the end of this training, there were 12 people that completed it. And I was one of 2 females out of the 12 that completed it. The following week, I went to airborne school and came back. And so then all the guys come back, and here I am, like double stacked, and they're just with their like parachutist badge. And, you know, but did that make them like me, or did that make them just be resentful? Because, you know, here I am, you know, it was always a, a tough choice. Like I was happy to have these opportunities, but it was like, oh gosh, are my counterparts, are my peers going to like me because I had this opportunity, you know, or are they going to be pissed off at me because I did have this opportunity and then I took it, and you know, it was challenging. And I, I I found it very hard to have a lot of friends, um, because I did well, but then I also found it hard to trust. But also, when it came time to do work, it was, um, people did trust me, you know. But I also lost myself, I think, because I became so programmed, you know. Like you had said, what was the very first line that you opened up with? You said that, gosh, it was so eloquent too, but essentially you were talking about how you like left your life as you knew it and you came in and
Yeah,
you just
went from being
became.
an individual to being part of a group where that was
Mhm,
the identity. I was
mhm,
just one of many of part of the group. I was no longer Mike. So
mhm,
can I just interject one thing? So
mhm,
Jessica is, not only is it difficult to pass the school she passed, um, she's a very humble woman, but just know that what she passed is really, really hard, even if you have things going for you as a male, and females are generally not appreciated at all in that line of work, from my experience. So the fact that she passed this means she's a very humble, certified badass. So
thanks,
yeah, just so you
thanks,
know that, mom.
thanks, thanks. But you know, it was, um, it's just always, in units that, in the rear, you know, in this op tempo, right? And I think you were in the same op tempo of, especially, not right now, because we have this, you know, we've drawn away, right? We've ended Afghanistan and Iraq, right? And that's a completely different story. But in the op tempo of being on, uh, what I was on, a quick reaction force. I was in a brigade that was, ready to deploy at a moment's notice. Everybody had to quickly put everything to the side. It didn't matter if you had children or not. And thankfully I didn't have any children, but there were many people, to the left and right, front and behind, that had children. And, you know, people have to have family care plans. And if you don't have a family care plan, for instance, you can get, you know, what is called chaptered out of the military. And the military doesn't really care if they put you to the side or not, you know. If you don't have somebody to take care of your children and they tell you it's time for you to go to war, then that's what has to be done. Um, and so anyhow, I guess I say that just because, there was always so much stress, and, you never knew when your day was going to end. I mean, you never knew. You'd go to PT and you had kind of a plan for, like, Mondays was, the day to work on your vehicles. Tuesday was the day that you would be, you know, working on admin stuff with your soldiers or whatever. But you never really knew what you were doing, and you never knew what time you were going to be home. And that creates so much stress on not only you as the individual, and you can kind of, you learn to let go of that and to be a little like free floating, because as you said, you're not in it by yourself, you're with other people. So you find bullshit to do, right? Like you laugh at each other, you know, you just find humorous ridiculousness to do. Like we could probably create our own like Jackass 8.0 or something, right? But
Yes.
then the family at home is, you know, what also ends up, you know, putting added stress. And, um, again, going back to it not being an individual process, just because I don't have children doesn't mean that my soldier's life is not my responsibility. It is my responsibility. So their kids end up being my responsibility if they're not taking care of their family and their wife is calling, then that's my problem.
Yeah, exactly.
So I have
Yeah.
to, if I may, I'm a little, I'm surprised a little bit to hear what I'm hearing is a lack of predictability. You're saying you don't really know what you're going to be doing. And in my mind, the military is very, very predictable, right? You know who everybody is because they have a name tag and you know their rank and you know, my thought was that there was a schedule and that, you know, that everything was very predictable, but everything was not controllable, right? And thinking in terms of safety, predictability, and control, right? In the military, I feel like, you know, you don't have control personally, right? You said, you know, you don't have control of your life, but that things are very predictable. But what I'm hearing is that there's actually a lot of lack of predictability. Is that right?
I think I would say that that depends on what your rank is. So as a junior enlisted person, yes, there was many things that were happening way above my head. I mean, there was a whole overall strategy to the battlefield and the war. I never knew what it was. There was a training plan and there was a plan of the day and all those things. I was never told these things. I was just yelled at to go over there and go over there and go over there. And so, yes, there is predictability and interactions with people in terms of I see the rank on someone's collar or shoulder, and I know what greeting to give that individual or whether or not I'm saluting. And I know how I measure up to that person, especially if we're wearing service or dress uniforms that display medals or ribbons. So I can see where this person has been and what they have accomplished. So that is predictable and where you are in the hierarchy of things. But the lower you are in that chain, you're less made aware of what's happening. You know, the information gets filtered from the very top downwards in terms of what you need to know. And I didn't need to know the overall arc of the training schedule and, you know, from building up to peaking and tapering before we went off to war. I just knew that I had to dig holes and I had to pack, you know, lots of water and carry heavy stuff. And then it was my turn at 2 o'clock to get up for fire watch and, you know, be up for that. So it was things like that.
I think that, Mike, you really, a light bulb went in my head actually about why my squad leaders, platoon sergeants, or platoon leaders would, not so much the officers, but why the NCOs would get so annoyed with me at times, because I am such a big picture person. I think it's because my control, right? Like my need to be safe, right? I was trying to control my environment, be predictable and have safety. I wanted the big picture. Well, why are we loading these Conexes? Why are we loading these 5 times? Why do we have to redo this? And it was because I wanted to understand. And I think that they would get so annoyed with me because they didn't have the answers. They didn't know themselves, you know? And
then also with that, I think one important part of that is that to perform commands or obey orders, you need to be instantaneous, and asking a question of why makes sense in this civilian world or for, you know, higher order thinkers, you know, intellectually stimulated people. However, you know, move that way, shoot that direction, lay suppressive fire down needs to just be instantly obeyed, or else people could be hurt or killed. Mission could be in jeopardy. So that, I mean, I think that was beaten into me so much that I stopped asking why. So, and one thing I'll add too, in the stress of things, I was actually worried that I wouldn't get to be able to kill somebody, because that was a big part of joining at least the Marine Corps. Was after every command, they said, all right, you know, reteaching us how to put our socks on, if you can believe that, building us from the ground up. All right, do it now, move. And we'd all say kill. And that was like just ingrained into our heads. So I was like, man, I really hope I get to kill somebody, because that seems to be the main point of this. So that's it. That's a stress I don't think people have talked about too much either.
Well, maybe we can use that to sort of transition to talk a little bit about being in combat and sort of leaving the States and being in country and what that's like.
Sure. Yeah. I can reiterate something that's been said a lot, that 90% of war or 95% of war is just boredom, playing cards, throwing little rocks at things, filling sandbags, sweating. And then there's 5 to 10% of sheer terror, where you're not sure what's exactly happening. And a lot of times your thinking brain is overwhelmed and you fall back to your training and react and act in a muscle memory type of way. So one of the biggest stresses I had there, leading a team and then eventually a squad of Marines, so from 4 to 13 Marines, was not so much, am I going to die? It was a stress, but my main concern was, am I going to get one of my guys killed? You know, am I going to do something that ultimately harms them or causes them to die and not come back to their family? So that was the main stress for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, as a medic, it was just going over every possible scenario of what could happen at any moment. I mean, my thinking was dark, right? So of what could happen, and just making sure that I was prepared. And it was, yeah, not about myself. I didn't have that opportunity to sit and think of be afraid for myself. It was game on at that point. That's my time to be ready. So I was just thinking as Mike was talking about how actually the very first time that I ever rolled out the gates was when I was leaving with 3 other medics, and we were on a forward treatment team, and we were going to our combat outpost. And I mentioned to you all that there's a documentary about it and a book about it. The documentary, it's a series on National Geographic. I will tell Alexandria what the book is called. It's escaped me, but it's on Camp War Eagle, right outside of Solder City. So anyhow, but the 3 of us, I just remember us, you know, this one little shit, I'll say. He's a Californian, actually. We would leave Fort Bragg and go surfing at times and everything together before we went to Iraq. And then Sergeant Scott, she was a mentor of mine. And I swear she went to Delta, because I have no idea what happened to her after the war. You know, these are people that, you know, you would die for. And then it's like, where are they now? And I still, you know, I feel their souls. But I just remember turning to each other, and we held each other's hands and just thinking like, oh my gosh, here we go. Said a little like prayer, and you know, everything was fine after that. But then yeah, each time you go out, you just never know what you're going to get, and just that hyper vigilance every single time. And I never thought that any other person or child was I hate to say that, I was suspicious of everybody, I guess, and maybe that was because of my job. But I really was suspicious of every single person. I may have shared this with you all that this was when I was in Afghanistan. We were coming back from a patrol, and I just so happened to be going out. I was a staff sergeant at the time. I may have been checking on another outpost of one of my guys. I was a platoon sergeant, and we stopped. One of the elders in this village had said that a woman had a baby, and something had gone wrong, and so the platoon leader was like, "Yes, we're gonna help." Like, what am I gonna do? Like, sure, I'm an OBGYN, right? Like, okay, sure, I'll do this. um, and so we stop, and he's like, "Okay, go in the house." I'm like, "No, you're gonna go clear that house for me first, and then I will go in." Like, it's and so I did have stress. I definitely had stress, and I think that sometimes when there were like medical things going on, and it seemed like it was a child that was hurt, or like legitimate things that just seemed gentler, that sometimes people's guards were down, but for whatever reason, I always still had my guard up, I guess, because I felt maybe like, if something happens to me, who's gonna who's gonna help me? But anyways, so yeah, that situation was okay. If anyone was wondering.
So one of the things that I often hear, and I maybe hear it a little bit in what you guys are saying, is that when the stress doesn't really catch up with you while you're there, right? While you are in country, or in that combat zone, because you're, so you have to just be here and be, I don't know, maybe I don't know why, I'll ask you guys, and that it really starts to catch up with you only when you really get back. Can you maybe speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I definitely can. And, I'll say the stress that was building up. I mean, I won't go through every firefight and battle I went through, but, I never got to go to any funerals of, my unit lost 21 people, my second deployment, and then a few more after that. But my very best friend, another redhead, was he was killed by an IED, an improvised explosive device, in July 20th of 2004. And just a day and a half ago, he and I were laughing, eating dinner together for what would be our last conversation, talking about how, we were going to, Jessica, you alluded to Jackass, which was popular at the time, a video where people just made pranks on each other. We were going to film a version of that when we got back, and we were going to introduce our girlfriends to each other and things like that. So when he was killed, the shock of losing someone didn't register. And I didn't have time to grieve, because within 3 hours, I had to go out on a mission myself. And I had to compartmentalize and put that to the side. Of course, I could not totally turn off my anger. And after that, every time we were engaged, I wanted to hurt and kill as many bad guys as possible, because, my mind was telling me they took from me, so now I need to take from them and make them hurt and suffer. And so all of the loss that I experienced, all of the, the chaos of combat, which, unlike the movies, maybe Saving Private Ryan or Black Hawk Down will portray it more accurately. But to be in the mind frame of someone in battle, you do not have your full prefrontal cortex operating a lot of the times, because the stress is so high that there's sounds, there's chaos. You follow what you think is the right way, and you do what you were trained to do. And you're always adapting, because nothing goes to plan. And so there was a significant month where I fought in the city of Fallujah, where that was happening in urban combat. And like Dan said, I didn't have time to process that until I got home. And it came out in a lot of different ways, in sometimes visual hallucinations. It came out in just overwhelming senses of like I was about to die, and nothing was going on around me that was remotely dangerous. I was, back in the United States. And coming back, besides numbing out with alcohol, the times where I would be sober, I would find myself, I remember one time walking down a staircase in my own house, and I put the pieces together later, years later, but I was walking down a staircase and I instantly felt this overwhelming fear and felt paralyzed. And so I just went limp on my stair and had a panic attack right there. And I didn't understand what was happening. I didn't know it was a panic attack. I didn't know I had post-traumatic stress. I just knew that I felt like I was about to die. And what I believe happened is that it was so similar to a situation in which I got engaged in a firefight right after walking down some stairs, that my body didn't have time to feel that and process that then. So it was safer for me to feel that and process that or experience those emotions later, years later. And these experiences would just keep happening and happening. And I never knew when they're going to pop up. I'd be driving to school and then my whole body would start sweating. And I would just feel like, well, something bad must be about to happen. So I'd turn around and go home and smoke as much cannabis as I could, drink as much alcohol as I could. So I could just not feel that anymore because it was so confusing. There's no part of my brain that said, oh, this is PTSD. You might be having a panic attack or experience hypervigilance and hyperarousal. These weren't terms I knew. It was just bad and chaos, and I didn't like it.
Thanks, Mike. So for me, when I got back from Iraq, I was having headaches. That was my first deployment. That was a 15-month deployment. I was having intense migraines. I essentially was set to get married, and I did get married to someone that I deployed with as well. And that was an abusive relationship. And he was struggling from PTS and alcoholism, and we couldn't help each other, unfortunately. And I was losing like my bowels and just my faculties, about myself, and just like put myself into my work. And we PCS'd to another high op tempo 10th Mountain Division here in New York. And then there was some domestic violence, and I really didn't drink at all I drank like maybe a handful of times, but each time I drank, there was a problem. And I still had all the isms. So if anybody here knows about the disease of addiction, I didn't need to have that substance in my body to have those issues. So anyhow, we separated, and then I went to Afghanistan. And when I was there, just intense stress. My job, the deployment was really, really hard. The loss of that deployment was really hard. Me being a leader and having various I was one of 3 women with 500 men in like over 3 different locations, small outposts, and in a field artillery unit. And my ex was in that unit too. and I was trying to keep everything in. And I remember I had breath work and meditation, but yet I didn't know that. And we'll talk about that, in a couple of weeks. But I wasn't sleeping well, and when I got home from that deployment, I drank and I drank and I drank. And then my stepfather passed away, who was like my father. And that was abrupt. And I left the military about 6 months after, and went down to West Point. And when I did that, I thought I had a plan, and my disease just picked up. I binge drank, and very similar to Mike, I would have these bodily experiences that just didn't make sense to me. And at various times I would connect with them, and at various times I would go and seek help. But I always came back to drinking because it was just like too much for me. I didn't have the support. I had another military, at the time, fiance, and then we got married later. We were together for 12 years, retired Army, active alcoholic, same kind of slew of storm, right? And just my body just like physically couldn't do it any longer. It was my body that finally spoke up and said, it just was screaming, and everything shut down for the most part. I ended up things that were kind of accumulating in my body when I was in the military. Circulation issues had now manifested into an autoimmune disease. So I ended up finding, myself. I was seeking help for other people, but it was actually for me, unbeknownst to me. But that's kind of what happened. All of the things all of those stressors were just so much that they just couldn't stay inside anymore. But I will tell you one thing I wanted to say, and I'll stop, is that I think Mike had mentioned that it was his anger, and on my side of it, it was the guilt. Like, I could have done better. I could have like patched him up better. I could have put a C-collar on him. I could have given him morphine. I could have, like called a medevac versus like, putting him in the vehicle, those kind of things. And then it was my soldier's guilt too, that, like, and then they were second guessing themselves. So that's kind of how it manifested for me when I was over there.
Yeah, the guilt and anger was, I will say that I can relate to the guilt as well for things, things that rationally I could not have done to prevent any of these deaths, but the guilt was still there. And we can go into at some point the agency of guilt and why it's there. But I think for today, just talking about the experience of it. Another way that, or one thing I did not mention is that after a particular near-death experience, I decided, well, I'm not going to make it home. And so I gave up trying to not die and just said, I'm going to do the best job I can. which actually worked out great. I was way more focused when I was there with this fatalistic kind of attitude. However, when I came back, I didn't know that my expectation had been to not come back. It wasn't a conscious thought, but subconsciously, my body and my brain were telling me, well, you're not even supposed to be here. So I couldn't plan ahead. I just felt guilt. I felt anger. I felt fear. I would numb those out with chemicals like alcohol and cannabis and sometimes opiates. And when that didn't work, I would ride my motorcycle blacked out, just hoping, something would happen. I wouldn't have to be here anymore. Put myself in risky situations like that because of not seeing a path forward. Also, the significance of my life seemed to diminish quite a bit after I left the Marine Corps, because I didn't have a unit of people who had my back anymore, who I trusted inherently and trusted more than I think I could ever trust someone else, because, being able to communicate without even speaking, just looking at someone and knowing what was expected, what I could do, what the plan was, who I could trust. And when you reach that level of communication and bonding with somebody, it's intense. So to lose that was another loss, even with
Yeah.
people who were living and who moved away across the country, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that unspoken kindred like spirit where you just walk into a room, you don't you don't have to say anything, and most of us don't ever share our like battle stories, whether we go to war or not. We don't share those stories. We just have that love, that comes through. And yeah, feeling isolated, feeling like there's something, not understanding it, like you said, on that subconscious level. And I don't know about you, I joined the fire department. Oh, there you go.
With you.
That's insane. I didn't cue that. But I did. I joined the fire department, and I did that for a few years. And not to like toot my own horn, but just to show you like how all in I go, I became the Hudson Valley firefighter of the year in 2015. And that was just because I was like so on and on and on and on. And then I realized one day, after I may have shared this with you guys, this woman had put her car on a railroad tracks, and the train had pushed her car into had pushed her car, and we were breathing for her and everything. And after that, I would show up to calls, and no one else knew it. It was like no one else could see it, but I was just like standing back. And I'm like, I'm a liability now. I am not an asset. I am like deep in my sickness. I have got to get out of here. And, I don't know how, and that made me feel even more alone. Like, what's wrong with me? How does no one else like see that I am like going through this,
Yeah. The thing with that too is like, even the people who wanted to see, like my own mom wanted to see that, didn't know how to handle the post-traumatic stress and symptoms that I was exhibiting, and in ways that made me feel even more isolated. For example, I got home and I moved in with my parents for like a month or two.
And that was torture.
And it
Love
didn't
you, Mom.
last. Yeah. And my mom, we grew up as cat people. I'm a dog person and a cat person now, but we had I love cats. And I was like, hey, Mom, I'm going to bring the cat in here for night. She's like, are you sure you won't wake up and think it's the enemy and try to kill it? I'm like, Jesus, Mom, what? I don't think we understand each other fundamentally at all anymore. And I would just have, not to pick on my mom, this was interactions that were having with people like, well, you're essentially a crazy person now. And So I would feel more isolated, which means I would ramp up the drinking and cannabis more to try to compensate for that. And then the guilt and anger would intensify, and memories would pop in that I did not plan on thinking about, that I had blocked out. And I would think, like, wait a second, like, did that actually happen? And I'd confirm with people, say, yes, these were crazy things that happened. There were body parts on different parts of walls and ceilings, and things like that would just chaotically pop up in my head, just partly.
Yeah, that when I was going through, yeah, the visual, like walking, having like real life happen, and then the actual like visual, it like real life, like visual you were talking about hallucinations, but not, but it not being a hallucination, it actually like in real time, like it, you're seen from years ago playing back to you. And and thinking, if it really happened, did that really happen? Am I making it up? Is it a story from some other time? Is it from a movie? And I definitely can relate to that. And like, I know on paper, yeah, I was a part of a catastrophic kill team, and then only remembering parts of that,
Yeah.
So can I just ask here, because I think this is partly why I think why we wanted to do this webinar, is to talk a little bit about right, for people who don't know, right, for people who don't get it, right, like you talked about your mom, Mike, right, and she said some things that probably weren't helpful. I would love to hear a little bit more about the social part of that, and coming back where when you're in, right, you can just look at the guys you're with, and you get each other, right, without even having to say anything. And then you come home, and there's probably things that people say that are very helpful, that are maybe helpful in some ways, and probably like what you just shared with us, Mike, probably things that aren't so helpful. Can we maybe speak to that in a little bit, to share with us, like, maybe what not to say, or what how do we support those who are going through that?
Yeah. So, well, the culture I came out of, the Marine Corps. What's a nice word, synonym for brainwashing? Indoctrination. I was heavily indoctrinated, and so being on time was very important to me. And also, I had felt a sense of danger if I was late, because that meant I was not there to support someone could be killed. My rational mind knew I was in community college at the time when I got out. But if someone was late to class, I would flip out. It was everything I could do, from like walking across the room and just choke slamming this person into the wall. And I was laid back by Marine Corps standards. I mean, if you can picture that. Like, so, but I would freak out. Or if somebody would ask, the quintessential questions of what not to ask a veteran, or, wow, you were in, so, how many people did you kill? And, it's like, I don't know, how many people in your family have been raped? Because that's not an appropriate question either, because it just, the lack of boundaries of someone to ask questions like that. Like, hey, I want to know about the most intimate / horrifying details of your life, so I can tell it at a party later about you, or something like that, just so casually we bring it up. So that was one. And asking me what it was like if they didn't really want to answer. Because sometimes if I was feeling more raw or angry, I'd tell them exactly what it was like. I'd say, like, oh, this is what it's like, and talk about the blood and gut stuff, and maybe even show them a picture of a dead person that I was posing with, something like that. And that would scare people and freak them out. But like, oh, I'm sorry, I thought you wanted to know. And so things like that. So punctuality, doing like the level of trust I had with the guys I was in with. If I said I was going to be somewhere, I was there. Same with them. And if they weren't, something bad had happened. Something was, there was a reason for that. So when I make plans with people and they wouldn't show up either on time or at all, it would wreck me. I'd be angry because I'd have a big fear reaction, but then the anger would resurface to protect me from feeling the fear and feeling weak and as a liability. The anger would promote me into a more empowered person, so I could take action. So I walked around angry a lot, afraid and angry.
Were there times that others were like, did say the right thing or were helpful in any way? I mean, you talk about being alone and no one's understanding where you're at.
Yeah.
And there isn't probably anything anyone can actually say to.
When people just told me, hey, welcome home, I'm glad you're here. That floored me. You know what really got me to cry in public, which is not something that Marines do or men ever do. So I cried in public when a Gold Star mother, a mother who had lost her son in Iraq, told me, hey, I am glad you're home. I'm glad you're alive. And I'm glad you're back with your family. And that, like, even now, just feeling tears welling about the gratitude and like the survivor's guilt, just boom, dispelling the somewhat, like, here's a mother who lost her son who's saying she's glad I'm back. But I had carried this story in my head that all these parents were angry at me for surviving when their son or daughter did not. So welcome home. I'm glad you're back. How are you? With a willingness to actually listen, or just a look, just like, hey, I'm glad you're here. Things like that. A genuine action would be very helpful.
Yeah.
Jessica, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think Mike said it, a genuine listening ear. You can tell, a veteran can tell when someone's not paying attention, when they're not genuine. So if you're just asking the question, just to ask the question, we're not going to give you the time, of day. And so I think that now's the time, the drawdown in Iraq, the drawdown in Afghanistan, this panel, more of these dialogues ought to happen so that we can, have these, bring these families closer, bridge the gap between the civilians and, I mean, we're civilians. We're not going to be in the military forever, right? Like, it's, our military was created for like war, right? So young men and women that are strong. But this is how it happens, so that we need to have, one, a safe, predictable and controlled environment, so that we can hear each other, and also, so that we can also hear the other side, because there's two sides. Again, this isn't just a mine and Mike's like story. This is also our family story too. They experienced something as well. They were at home waiting by the phone. They were at home like watching the news, reading our letters, praying at night, looking up at the moon and the stars, and I can't imagine what it was like for them. So yeah, I would have to say to just take the time and sit down and listen, and want to be a participant in the conversation. But also, like, there were fun times, like Mike said, when we started the combat, dialogue, that 95% 5% of the time, it's just like shooting the shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, with a good time. Yeah, exactly. So knowing that, I think not placing a veteran in three of the big stereotypes that I'm familiar with, like the hero or hero worship, the cold-blooded killer, or the broken person, or like the ticking time bomb, because those are easy categories to place somebody in. So then we don't have to humanize them and experience them, their full being. Like, yeah, like I had like horrific times in the military. I wouldn't trade it for anything though. I also had times where I had a company-wide dodgeball tournament, and we named one of the coolest guys Barbarian because he slang a dodgeball so hard and knocked out like 5 dudes at once. And so like things like that, like there's outstanding highs and really sad lows and very intense things. And I'd say for some people interacting with veterans to, so not stereotype, be genuine, and not be afraid of seeing where the conversation goes, but not trying to push past a person's comfort limit, because the safety and the trust, you see someone get defensive very quickly, like this does not feel safe. Just knowing that people are ready to speak about things in their own time. Yeah.
And I'd say with parents or family members or friends that have a significant other or friend or family member that is concerned about their veteran or active duty member, there's so many veteran organizations that would love to go and help if you're concerned about your veteran, whether it's they have financial issues or substance use issues, or they're just depressed or anxious, not just, but here's a great place to start here at Veterans Yoga Project. So many different resources for us to get you, but your local veteran service agency can totally point you in so many different places, to get you whatever help that they need. They have a plethora of information. And Dan, you had mentioned, there's like that decompression time from, and I think it's just because we're go, 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 go. And so there is that time where it takes time when it comes to the surface. Whether it's like survivor's guilt or just like feeling of like loss of your tribe or whatever have you, but if you're hearing this now and you just left the military, I urge you to like get involved now before you're like on that fence and you're struggling.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
I'd like to add one practical thing too, is that if you're a veteran who you just gotten out, we have a lot of acronyms that we speak with, and if you're a civilian, you can just say, I don't know what that means. Can you explain that? I mean, for example, I could talk about how my DD-214 doesn't show how many times I shot a 60, an M9, M16, or a 203, or how many times I went to the DFAC before I EAS'd, right? What does that any of that mean, right? We just throw all those out there. So you can say like, you did what? Oh, I was talking about the weapons I shot and going to eat lunch. So
there you go.
Before I open it up for any questions from folks, anything else that you guys would want to share about military stress and trauma, either going in, being in, or getting out?
I would, yeah. As an all or nothing, black or white, on or off kind of extreme thinker and doer, it took me a while to find balance and realize that just because I was not, an active killer anymore, did not that mean that I had to be a completely submissive, I don't know, weak person like that. Like just trying to find my identity as a person took a lot of time. But I don't know, maybe it's more it speaks more to the addictive qualities of my personality, or the extremes, that the military can bring out, that I'd say for people who are just getting out to recognize that, yeah, there's a lot of extreme things we did, and you might find the need to chase that high of adrenaline. That's a very real thing that I spent a lot of times doing, fighting, riding motorcycles, sober or very drunk, to get that thrill again, and just observing what that is and seeing how you can do that maybe in a safe context.
Yeah. If you did not watch Dan's first week, I believe you still can, right, Dan? But trauma is, literally like just stubbing your toe, right? So it doesn't have to, and it's relative. And you can also have vicarious trauma, right? So hearing someone else's story, indirect trauma as well. And something that I hear a lot from the veterans that come into the center where I'm at, I facilitate PTSD groups, and they're like, well, I didn't get PTSD from the military or whatnot. And I'm like, oh, well, do you have anything, we get to talking and they're like, oh, well, I have some anxiety and depression and blah, blah from this other thing. And I'm like, okay, well, come on into the group, and we get in, and next thing you know, they start talking about some experiences through basic training or through their unit or something. And so, it doesn't have to be this large explosive experience that, of going into war. And, I think that just like Mike was saying, that it doesn't have to be to the extreme. And I think that a stressor can be something that affects you in such a way that it impacts your life, where it maybe keeps you up at night or causes you to, lose focus on something that you're doing. We're here for you. And the more that you can identify with someone like Mike and myself, that means that you're not alone. And the more that you can share your story, that means that the next person that is sitting down and worrying, that means that they're not alone. And so we just continue to create community. We continue to help guide each other towards, positive growth. And, we're like working towards healing and moving away from, being stuck. So I just encourage everybody to recognize that it's not about some stigma of, being broken. It's just about maybe having a time where you're stuck and, needing to seek some guidance for a way out.
Yeah. And quickly to add to what you're saying, Jessica, is that pain is pain. Trauma is trauma. You don't have to have a story like John Rambo and jump out of freaking exploding helicopters to have PTSD. If you were feeling it and you experience something that still lingers and has that cringe feeling in your gut when you think about it, that is trauma. That is pain, and it is as valid as anyone else's.
Thank you so much for that. And it goes back to last week, right? When we looked at the PTSD criteria, there are 636,000 ways of combinations of symptoms that you can have post-traumatic stress. There are 1.5 million men and women serving in the military. So Mike and Jessica, thank you for sharing your 2 stories with us. And a reminder to everyone, right, that those are just 2 out of those, millions of stories that are out there. But I very much appreciate hearing from you guys and hearing your perspective and hearing those stories, because it's experiences that I don't have. And so I very much appreciate you being here and sharing your experience with everyone. If there's any questions, feel free to put them into the chat. Redene, if I'm pronouncing that right, it seems that military training is the main cause of PTSD, more so than combat. So maybe we can take a minute to talk about that. Does military training cause more PTSD than the combat itself? And are there steps being taken to transform that training to make it less trauma-inducing? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, for me, the combat was way more traumatic. Had I not had harsh training, yeah, some things can be adjusted, but had I not had that level of extreme indoctrination, I would not have been able to survive what I did. So for me and what I did in the military, I was grateful to have it as hard as it was.
Yeah, there's absolutely a need for us to, like Mike said, to not ask questions all the time, like me, what's the big picture? What's the big picture, right? Act, do, right? Because our life is on the line. And I was recording a podcast, and the person that was interviewing me, I was telling them how I regret that I wasn't more human, to my soldiers, how I was very direct, and my soldiers called me the standard. And, and the person, Andy Van Trace, she had said, well, but there was a reason, right? And I said, yeah, you're right, because it was life or death. And so, I think that they are changing things in basic boot camp a bit, but that's more on like abuse type thing, hazing stuff. But as far as us needing to execute orders, no. And I understand why.
Yeah.
Thank you both. Not seeing any other questions, but seeing that we are now at 24 minutes after the hour, this seems like a good place to wrap up. But what I'll invite you guys to do is just to take a few deep breaths with me. We've covered some heavy stuff today, and I want to really just acknowledge Jessica and Mike, right? This is not easy shit to talk about, right? This is not, right? It's real, right? It's real and it's raw, and there's pain and there's trauma there. And so very much appreciate your bravery and your willingness to be authentic with us, but to remind the rest of us, right, that right, vicarious trauma is the thing, right? We can be affected by these stories that we hear.
Yeah, I did 3 Peloton workouts just to prepare for this.
Can I say one thing?
Of course you can.
Okay. When Jessica was coming back from Iraq, I got a letter in the mail from, I think she was a first lieutenant, Amy Rodriguez. And that was Jessica. She was in Jessica's unit. And she wrote me a letter telling me, that she would be coming home, and for what we need to do and what we should not do. And that's like, ask her a million questions. Because, my husband and I had a million questions for Jessica, and especially my husband. But, and they said it's, she will talk to us about what she has seen and what she has done in her time. And I thought it was going to be really difficult to just keep my mouth shut, about it. Like, what am I going to talk about? Like, oh my God, you look really good. What are you going to do today? And so we had to think about things to just keep busy. And and just listen. My husband was like the best listener ever. And we never really did have that conversation at all to this day with her because, of course, of all the events that followed, Afghanistan and everything else that she had gone through. So it's a slow process for everyone, and including, the family. But you could see things happening. And it's hard for you not to step in because she's an adult and you can say small things but be mindful that, make sure that you're saying things, not to be hurtful, and be kind. And all that is really difficult to do. It's almost like you don't want to talk, and when my husband had died, we were going through that grief and that trauma, and she just got back from Afghanistan. So it was like just big explosion. And nobody wanted to talk. It was really hard. And I think the Army never told us when, like, they never gave us a handbook about when we could talk about things that happened. Like, when do you talk to your soldier? And what do you talk about? Do you go take a walk on the beach and everything just comes out? That's not how it works. So, I don't know. I'm sure they still don't have that handbook anywhere, but
Yeah.
you just have to rely on, like keeping in contact and reaching out constantly. And that, I always do that anyways, personally, but I love my daughter.
Thank you
So,
so much, Tressa. I really think it's hearing you talk is a great reminder for us, right? That it isn't just the human being who's in the uniform that's affected by all of this, right? There are parents and brothers and sisters and kids, and that communication is really hard, and to recognize that and have compassion for each other, right? That this stuff is not easy. Right. And while yoga doesn't cure PTSD, right, what we do when we breathe, when we extend the exhale, we actually make it easier to talk, right? We actually set the human nervous system in a way that makes it easier to communicate. And I do think that that's where the healing happens. It's between people, right? It's social and it's interactive and interdependent. So we could spend all day talking, and I feel like we actually probably could and want to and would enjoy that. But we are now 2 minutes before the time when we agreed we would stop, and timeliness is important, as we have heard. So I'm going to invite us all just to take 3 deep inhales together, starting with 1 inhale. And then just allow that exhale to be long and deep and slow. Another big full inhale. Maybe a brief pause and see if you can make that exhale even slower than the previous exhale. And deeper and fuller. And then inhaling again. And then longer exhale again. We are going to pick up again in 2 weeks, and we're going to bring Mike and Jessica back, and we're going to start to talk about the recovery side, right? And acknowledging all the difficulty intrinsic in that. And of course, as part of that recovery, we'll talk about post-traumatic growth. So once again, thank you all for being here as part of our PTSD Awareness Month, our Light a Candle campaign. Thank you again, Michael and Jessica, for being here. So grateful and so honored to get to call you my friends. And to everyone else, thank you. And we'll see you next week, which I believe is happening on